Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into the kind of fog that doesn't just hang in the air. It clings to your thoughts, your lungs, your memory. It's the kind of fog that erases the past and dares you to find it again. Picture this, I'm standing in my kitchen, clutching a lukewarm mug of coffee that I've already reheated twice. It's 7:08 a.m., and the only thing louder than the silence is the hum of the fridge. That's when the dispatch crackles in just one sentence. They found a buried school bus near Morning Lake. My stomach doesn't drop. It sinks like a stone into that lake. I don't need to hear another word, because I already know what bus it is. I've known for 39 years, and somehow I've been waiting for this exact morning. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I want to know who else is awake in the fog. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soft noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. The thing about living in Halstead County is you get used to fog. It slides across the pines like spilled paint, settles into gravel driveways, and curls beneath porch lights, like a cat that never belonged to anyone. But this morning it feels thick, like the kind of fog that knows what it's hiding. I leave the coffee on the counter. I don't even pour it out. I don't lock the front door either. I just grab my keys, slide on my boots, and go. The drive to Morning Lake is slow. Not in a lazy way, but in that warped, dreamy pacing you get when the world forgets how to move quickly. Pines rise up on both sides of the two-lane road like old sentinels who remember too much. Every few seconds I think about turning around. I don't. I pass the abandoned ranger station. It's still there, graffitied, boarded up, sagging in the middle like a tired sigh. The overgrown service road that used to lead to the nature camp is barely visible through the fog, but muscle memory does the steering. I drive it like I've never stopped. And then I see it. The construction crew has already cleared a perimeter. There under a shroud of dirt and ivy sits a yellow ghost, cracked, collapsed in places, but still unmistakably a school bus. The guy in the hard hat greets me with the kind of face you save for funerals. Ma'am, we didn't touch anything once we saw what it was. I just nod. My throat's not working. They've managed to unearth the rear door of the emergency exit. It hangs open like a broken jaw. There's a smell, earthy, stale, with a sharp tang of something sour underneath. Not death, just time. I step inside, and suddenly I'm 9 again, watching my classmates laugh and shove each other over who gets the window seat, listening to the teachers shout about sunscreen and snack schedules. I remember every face, every voice. I remember not being there. Chickenpox. That's why I stayed home. It's funny what gets to you, not the missing kids, not the empty seats, not even the silence. It's the pink lunchbox under the third row, the kind that had a thermos inside with soup that never stayed warm. I crouch next to it, and for a second, I swear I can smell SpaghettiOs. On the dashboard, there's a paper. It's yellowed, curling at the corners. But I know that handwriting. Ms. Delaney. She always wrote like she was trying to impress someone. A list of names, 15, but scrawled in red marker, angry and crooked over the bottom. We never made it to Morning Lake. I step back, and the air gets colder. You ever notice how silence has a shape? This one's heavy, pressing in around me like the inside of a coffin lined with fog. Outside, a bird calls, but it doesn't sound right. More like a warning than a welcome. I look back at the foreman. My voice finally returns. Seal the area. No one touches anything until the state team gets here. He nods, mouth drawn tight, probably thinking about his own kids. As I walk back to my car, I glance once more at the bus. It sits nestled among the trees like it grew there. But someone had to bury it. And someone stayed long enough to leave that message. It takes less than a minute for the memories to crash in. Nora Kelly, Caleb, Marcy, kids I knew, kids I never said goodbye to. I should have been on that trip. Instead, I was stuck at home with a fever and a VHS copy of The Last Unicorn. And now I might be the only one left to remember. The thing about ghosts, real ones, not sheet-wearing Halloween types, is they don't moan or float through walls. They wait. Quietly. In the corner of your memory, in a dusty box in the attic, or sometimes in a rusted yellow bus unearthed from the ground like a time capsule no one asked to open. Back at the sheriff's office, I didn't sit down. Couldn't really. The weight behind my knees wouldn't allow it. I just stood there staring at the phone on my desk like it might tell me what to do next. The official word from forensics would take hours, probably days. But I wasn't waiting. I needed answers. I needed something to anchor myself to. So I drove straight to the old county records building. The place hadn't changed much since I was a teenager, mildew-scented hallway ceiling fans that looked exhausted just from spinning, and a clerk named Janie, who still wore her glasses on a beaded chain like it was 1978. When I told her what I needed, she didn't even blink. Holstead Ridge Elementary, field trip 6B, May 19th, 1986, she asked. I nodded. She disappeared into the back and returned 10 minutes later with a box so fragile it looked like it might disintegrate if I sneezed in its direction. She slid it across the counter with both hands reverent, as if she were handling someone's ashes. No updates. Sealed 5 years after. No one ever came back for it. That felt wrong, but not surprising. I carried it to a side table and opened it slowly like it might scream. Inside were faded photographs, official memos typed in courier font, and handwritten notes from staff members whose names I hadn't heard in decades. And then there it was, a photo of the entire class, everyone lined up in front of the bus that would vanish hours later. I scanned the faces until I landed on her. Nora Kelly, big green eyes, pink ribbon in her hair. That lopsided grin she always wore when someone told a joke she didn't quite get. She'd lived 2 houses down from me. We'd spent summers sharing popsicles on the curb and daring each other to eat grass. Seeing her face again hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. Like stepping on a nail you didn't know was still lodged in your foot. I was still staring at it when the knock came. Deputy Harris stood in the doorway wide-eyed. "Sheriff," he said, "you need to come. Now." We drove fast. No sirens. Just urgency humming between us like a second engine. A couple had found her by the river not far from the dig site. She was slumped against a tree stump wrapped in a blanket that looked older than she was, clutching a rusted tin lunchbox like it was gold. At first they thought she was homeless, a woman who'd slipped through the cracks. But she said a moment, "Nora." When I got to the hospital, she was already in a gown hooked up to machines that beeped like anxious little birds. Her hair was gray at the roots, but still braided, and her skin was too pale, stretched thin over bones like someone who hadn't eaten right in years. I stepped into the room, and for a second, the world narrowed to just the sound of her breathing. She turned her head and blinked slowly. "They told me no one would remember," she whispered. I sat beside her and waited. "That no one would come," she added, voice cracking like paper. My mouth felt too dry to answer. I wanted to say I never forgot you, but I wasn't sure it would matter. "Who told you that?" I asked gently. She looked past me, out the window, and then quieter. We never made it to Morning Lake. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my truck outside the hospital, engine off, watching the shadows move across the lot. Every light seemed too bright, every sound too loud. She was alive. One of them. Nora Kelly had survived nearly 40 years in silence. And now she was here breathing, blinking, whispering secrets she was never supposed to tell. You know what's wild? The moment I believed her wasn't when she said her name. It wasn't even when she recognized me in that old class photo I brought in. It was when she asked if the SpaghettiOs were still in the pink lunchbox. I laughed, out loud. In that sterile hospital room, not because it was funny, but because only someone who'd actually been there would know. Only someone who remembered would ask about canned pasta. She smiled when I laughed. "Most people don't," she said. "Believe I mean?" "Well, I do. Of course I do. What else can you do when a ghost walks back into your life, not floating, not moaning, but hungry, hollow, and real? The hospital's waiting room coffee tastes like regret. Burnt, bitter, and unavoidable. I drank 2 cups anyway, because sometimes your hands need something to do when your mind is scraping through memories like a VHS tape on rewind. Nora was resting again. The doctor said she needed fluids, calories, and time. But what she needed most was someone to believe her. And I did. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't. She remembered things no one else should have. Details about our street, about my dog's name back then. Buttons, rest in peace. And about how I had chickenpox that week and missed the field trip. A fact so obscure even my mom wouldn't have remembered it. So I went back to the bus. Fog had lifted, but the silence remained. This time I brought gloves and a camera. I don't know why. Habit maybe? Or maybe because documenting something feels like control. And right now, everything else felt like falling. I stepped into the hollowed-out shell again, and this time I noticed more. The seatbelts were latched on 3 seats. Why no one buckles themselves on a school bus unless they're told to? Especially not in 1986, when seatbelts on buses were basically mythical creatures. I crouched next to the lunchbox again. It was still there, right where it had always been. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Instead, I turned to the front and scanned the area again. That's when I saw it. Tucked behind the dashboard, barely visible under years of grime, was a second paper. This one folded edges brittle. I used tweezers to pull it free. My hands were sweating despite the chill. It was a photo. 8 kids, maybe 9, standing in front of a low wooden building, something like a lodge or a barn. Their faces weren't right, not scared, not happy, just blank, like someone had hit pause on their emotions. A few of them I recognized right away. Marcy with her cartoon socks. Elijah, who used to eat glue when he thought no one was looking. And then circled in red ink Caleb. He'd been Nora's best friend. But what made my stomach churn wasn't the photo itself. It was what was written on the back. Winter 1, proof of presence. I've seen enough horror movies to know what that sounds like. This wasn't a memory. It was a record. Someone was keeping track. I brought the photo to Nora the next morning. She was sitting up, hairbrushed, eyes clearer but still rimmed in shadows. Her hands trembled when I handed her the image. She didn't speak at first, just stared. Then one by one she started naming them. Caleb, Marcy, Sam, Jonah. Her voice shook when she reached the last one. "That's me," she whispered. "After the first winter. They made us pop-ups once a season to show progress." I sat down, slowly. Where was this taken? She shook her head. We were never allowed to know, always blindfolded when moved. But I remember sounds, a river, a whistle at sunset, in the air. It always smelled like rust and pine needles. Sensory memory, strongest type. Even trauma can't erase that. We stayed there the longest. She added her voice, barely a thread. It was the worst of the places. How many places were there? She just looked at me, then whispered, "Too many." I don't know what broke me more, that she survived it or that others might still be out there. You ever hear the term implanted forgetting? It's an actual academic phrase. Some psychologists use it to describe what happens when people are trained not just to suppress memories, but to replace them with fake ones. Like giving your brain a virus. And I think someone tried that on them. But Nora didn't forget. She remembered enough to draw me a map. It wasn't perfect, just scribbled lines and landmarks described by sound and smell. But it was more than I'd had yesterday. I pinned it to the board in my office right next to the photo from the bus. Fog rolled in again that afternoon, almost poetic. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and asked myself the question I hadn't dared yet. What if this isn't over? What if the bus wasn't just a mistake? What if it was a message, and what if someone out there is still keeping count? Some days the universe speaks in symbols. Other days it just hurls a brick through your window with a note attached. The next one was a brick kind of day. That morning a package showed up at the sheriff's office. No return address, no postage, just sitting there on the front step like a stray daring me to pet it. Inside a map, not Nora's. This one was older printed, laminated, the kind park rangers used to hand out before smartphones turned us all into amateur navigators. But someone had marked it. Red pen, precise. Not a doodle, no loopy circles or jagged X's. These were tight boxes drawn around a section of the woods near Morning Lake, but deeper west past where the trail maps ever reached. And written in the margin in the same thin, neat script, property acquired 1984, operational site 3, Q4 transition successful. Operational site. It sounded like a government term or a logistics note, but something about the phrasing made my stomach tighten. I laid it next to Nora's sketch. The overlap wasn't perfect, but close enough that my teeth started to itch. Someone was tracking what happened out there, and I was beginning to think it wasn't just some cult. This felt structured, funded, like someone had a budget in a quarterly report. You know what's ironic? We spend our whole lives assuming the world is too disorganized for a conspiracy. But sometimes the scarier truth is that someone was organized, and those people usually keep receipts. I grabbed my gear, just the basics. Flashlight, first aid kit, backup battery for my phone, and yeah, a small flask of bourbon. Don't judge. Field trips are stressful. The road into the woods had long since vanished. I parked near the old Riverview access gate and hiked in on foot. And wouldn't you know it, about 2 miles in I heard it. Not a voice, not footsteps, a whistle, high and distant, like an old train brake or someone signaling across a ravine. The sound carried over the treetops, bounced between the trunks, and somehow landed right in the pit of my stomach. I froze, then kept walking. The ground sloped down, roots tangled like old ropes underfoot, and the fog thickened again, as if the trees were exhaling secrets. That's when I saw the building, or what was left of it. A low wooden structure leaned into the hillside, half its roof caved in vines, snaking up through the beams like they were trying to pull it underground. But the shape matched the photo Nora had identified. This was it. I stepped inside the floor, groaning under my boots. Dust swallowed the air, thick enough to taste. My flashlight caught the skeletal remains of furniture, bunk beds maybe. A desk. A heater rusted through like a rotted jaw. But it was the far wall that stopped me. Names, carved deep into the wood, some sloppily like they were done in a hurry, others carefully etched, repeated multiple times like someone was trying not to forget. Kimmy, Elijah, Maria, Caleb. Scratched out Sam, Nora, written 3 times, one below the other. I ran my fingers across them, my skin tingling like the wood remembered pain. Behind me a soft sound like a step on old wood. I turned quickly, flashlight sweeping the room. Silence. Then from upstairs a voice. You're not like them. Not a whisper. Not loud, just echo. And young. I froze. Then called out, I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to help. No answer. I climbed the stairs anyway. They creaked like a protest, but held. At the top landing, the hallway stretched ahead, dust motes dancing in the narrow beam of light. One door, slightly ajar, flickered with a faint orange glow. Candlelight. I stepped inside. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, pale, thin, wrapped in layers of clothing too big for him. Maybe 12 years old, maybe 25. With these kids, it was hard to tell. Time had treated them like rumors. My name's Lana, I said gently. He looked up. Jonah. His voice was small but steady. Are you alone? I asked. He shook his head and pointed to the wall behind an old bunk bed. There, boom. I moved closer. At first I didn't see it, then I did. More names. But these weren't carved, they were burned into the wood, as if done with heat, or time, or something else entirely. And unlike the others, these names were precise. Straight lines, measured spacing, like someone had taken their time. Jonah was still staring at the floor. They made me watch, he said softly. Said I was good at remembering. I sat down beside him, not sure if I should cry or scream, or just sit still and not mess it up. Instead, I asked, do you want to leave? He didn't answer, just looked at me with the saddest eyes I've ever seen. You came back, he whispered, not to me, to the room, to the place. Like it had been waiting too. When someone looks at you like you're the first sunrise they've seen in years, you don't argue. You don't correct them or tell them you're just a small town sheriff with a crick in your back and a pair of boots older than TikTok. You just hold that space and try not to break it. Jonah didn't say much after that, but his eyes followed me as I explored the room. There were remnants, paper scraps shoved into cracks in the floorboards, candle stubs melted into old mugs, a wooden crate filled with faded Polaroids warped with moisture but still legible, photos of kids, some smiling, some not. A few I recognized instantly, Marcy with her frizzy pigtails and her trademark peace sign, Sam mid-blink, always too distracted to notice cameras. And then, one of me, 9 years old, chickenpox rash faintly visible on my cheek, holding a juice box like it was a golden trophy. You were supposed to come, Jonah said behind me. I turned. I got sick. He nodded. That was lucky. I didn't say anything. Lucky's not the word I would have used. Jonah knelt beside the crate and began sorting through the photos like they were holy relics. His thin fingers trembled over each face. I remember her, he said, tapping one. Marcy. She used to hum when it was too quiet. He tapped another. Elijah. He wet the bed every Thursday. We stopped making fun of him after year 2. And then one more. Cassia. She drew on the walls. Said she'd leave a trail for someone to follow. Cassia. That was a new name. I made a mental note. Then I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. Are there more of you? He hesitated, then nodded. They kept some of us in different places. Moved us when we asked too many questions. Or when someone new came. That tracked with Nora's map. Fragmented paths, whispered transitions. But this place, he continued, was where they trained the obedient ones. My blood chilled. Trained them for what I asked. He looked away. To forget. There it was again. Implanted forgetting. I'd once sat through a psychology lecture where some tenured professor insisted that memory wasn't storage, it was reconstruction. That every time you remember something, you're really just building a new version of it, which means you can be taught to remember wrong. And if you're taught that early enough, well, it's not wrong anymore. It's your truth. That's what they did to these kids. Jonah walked over to the far wall and tapped the bunk bed frame. Lift it, he said. I did. Beneath the dust and rusted slats, a compartment, handmade, carefully disguised. Inside, a notebook. Worn leather cover, smelled like mildew and graphite. The pages were filled with equations, half-sketched doodles, and what looked like Bible verses at first glance. But as I flipped through, I saw it. Codes, dates, names, page margins scribbled with numbers and patterns. Cassia, repeated, then crossed out, then rewritten again, and again. Then on the very last page, Cassia did not forget. Cassia ran. Cassia saw what they did in room 6. Jonah leaned against the wall. They never found her. Or maybe they did and just erased her. I took a shaky breath. Room 6. It sounded too clinical to be ominous. But in this context, it might as well have been called the pit. I opened my notebook and wrote it down, underlined 3 times. Jonah looked up. Will you come back? I will, I said, but I need to find the others first. He nodded, and then he did something that made my throat tighten. He handed me a drawing, crayon on old graph paper. It showed a girl standing under a full moon holding a sign. 3 words, we are still here. I drove back in silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, where your brain feels like it's holding its breath. Nora was awake when I returned, sitting up straighter now, a little color in her cheeks. I found Jonah, I told her. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. He never forgot. I handed her the drawing. Her hand flew to her mouth. That's Cassia, she whispered. You remember her? She used to hide sugar packets in her shoes. Said if you had sweetness, you could survive anything. I smiled at that, but it faded quickly, because the drawing wasn't just art. It was a map, a clue, and a reminder that the silence wasn't empty, it was hiding something. And we weren't alone in it anymore. The phrase room 6 lodged itself in my mind like a splinter I couldn't dig out. It wasn't just the words, it was the way Jonah had said them and the way Nora had gone quiet the second I brought them up. She looked away, her jaw tightening. The kind of reaction that tells you the brain has filed something under do not open unless absolutely necessary. I waited. Cassia told me about it. She finally said, her voice thin. They called it the garden. I blinked. Wait, room 6 is a garden. That's what they said, she whispered. But it wasn't. No windows, no lights, just voices. We weren't allowed to talk back. We weren't allowed to cry. I didn't ask what happened if they did. She didn't say. Later that afternoon, I sat in my office flipping through the notebook Jonah had given me. The margins were a spider web of symbols, biblical references, and the kind of half-math that only makes sense to someone in survival mode. But then I found it. A sequence. Pages labeled with dates cross-referenced against missing persons reports I'd pulled from the cold case archives. A pattern emerged. Every 38 days, give or take, there was movement, transfers, disappearances, and then dead silence. After March the 3rd, 1991. Until now. You ever see a bird hit a window? It flaps, stuns itself, then staggers back into the sky like nothing happened. But you can see it how it never flies the same again. That's how I felt holding that notebook. Still breathing, still moving, but off balance in a way that didn't have a name. At the bottom of one page, written in sharp graphite, Garden Uttles Room 6 equal no return. Door sealed 1991, I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The air felt heavier, like the whole room was being compressed. And then my landline rang. It was Deputy Harris. "We've got something," he said. "You should come." Words no one likes to hear, especially when they come without details. 20 minutes later, I was standing beside a shallow pit just beyond the old logging road. A forensics team had been sweeping the area when they found it. A hatch, half buried under twisted roots and debris, not metal wood reinforced with concrete slats. The kind of structure made to look like nothing at all. We cleared it slowly. Every time the crowbar groaned against the hinges, it felt like we were peeling open a wound that didn't want to heal. Finally, it gave way. Inside was darkness so thick it felt alive. My flashlight barely dented it. The air that rushed out was cold, dry, and laced with something faintly metallic like blood that had dried a long time ago. We descended one by one, a narrow stairwell crumbling at the edges, then a sloped corridor. At the end, a door. Heavy, bolted, bricked over from the outside. Jonah hadn't been lying. We called in a concrete breacher from the fire department. Took 4 hours to chip through. Every blow echoed like a heartbeat on the walls. And then it opened. Room 6, the garden. It wasn't a room, not in any way you'd expect. It was a void. No furniture, no fixtures, no color. Just walls, too close, too damp, stained with water damage, and something darker beneath. And the smell, a mix of old soil, sweat, and iron, thick enough to taste, faintly sweet like spoiled fruit. We stepped inside. The walls were marked scratches, symbols some that matched Jonah's notebook. In the far corner, tucked beneath a pile of tattered blankets and old clothing, was a figure. Thin, pale, wrapped in so many layers I couldn't tell their shape at first. Alive, eyes wide, watching. A woman mid to late 30s, though time hadn't been kind. Her skin had the translucence of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Her hair was matted but braided deliberately. And she spoke before we did. "You're late," she said, voice hoarse. I knelt beside her. "What's your name?" "They called me Obedient," she replied. But I wasn't. I kept records, in code, like we used to do in math class. She handed me a journal, bound in string held together with rubber bands that crumbled at my touch. Inside, more pages, sermon notes, cult-like ramblings. But the corners held the truth. Names, dates, events. Cassia escaped 1991, status unknown. Marcy burned during fire, presumed dead. Caleb transferred, never returned. Sam broken hatch, not recovered. Each one a story, a life, a secret someone didn't want told. "What happened to the ones who didn't forget?" I asked her. She looked at me, eyes so tired they barely moved, then whispered, "They made them forget harder." I didn't understand, not yet. But I would, because the deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about abduction. This was about erasure, intentional, surgical, and patient. And someone had been watching the whole time. Somewhere there's a line between memory and mythology, and Room 6 blurred it completely. After we carried the woman, her name was Mina, by the way, into the daylight, she passed out almost immediately. Her body just couldn't process the sudden shift, warmth, light, noise. Like her senses had been dialed down to grayscale and we'd flipped the whole world back into Technicolor. Back at the hospital, the doctor said her vitals were fragile but stable. They hooked her up, ran tests, whispered in hallways. One nurse cried. Meanwhile, I sat in my truck and read her journal. And it hit me like a freight train at 5 miles an hour, not fast enough to kill you, just enough to make sure you never walk straight again. The first 20 pages were pure doctrine. Stuff about renewal through erasure, spiritual reformatting, and something chilling called the harvest model. Think cult pamphlets meets corporate HR manual. But beneath the lines, literally scribbled between the text, were notes, real notes, scraps of truth wrapped in lies. And every few pages, her tiny, desperate handwriting offered breadcrumbs. One of them read Sanctuary, 1987. Transition site number 2. Cassia taken, screamed entire time. I stopped there. Cassia again. Always Cassia. I pulled out Jonah's notebook, flipped to the coded index. Cassia was everywhere, circled, underlined, scratched out, rewritten. And finally, on the last page of Mina's journal, Cassia ran. Cassia saw room 6 before they sealed it. She remembered. You want a real spine chiller that was dated April 12, 1991, the day after the facility was allegedly shut down. That night, I visited Nora again. She looked better, less ghost, more person. She even joked about the pudding cups being too fancy. I showed her the journal. Her hands shook. She recognized Mina's writing. She taught us math, she said. The real kind, not the garbage they made up. She mentioned Cassia again, I said gently. Nora flinched. She said Cassia escaped. No, Nora whispered. She didn't. They let her run. I stared. Why would they do that? To see what would happen, she said bitterly. Cassia was a test. I exhaled through my teeth. Test for what? For forgetting, for remembering. For surviving, I jotted it all down. You ever hear of the Baker experiment? It's a real psychological case. 2 groups of people are shown the same man. One group is told his name is Baker. The other is told he is a baker. Guess who remembers better? The ones who knew he was a baker. Because identity sticks deeper than names. And I think whoever ran room 6 knew that. They weren't just breaking memories, they were reshaping identity. Cassia didn't forget, so they made her run. And now, according to Mina, she might still be out there. I checked the county's missing persons database. No Cassia listed around that time. But then I didn't expect her to be. If someone went to all this trouble to erase kids, why leave a paper trail? So I dug deeper. Local newspapers, obituaries, church newsletters. One librarian even let me search the uncatalogued clippings drawer, which, in case you are wondering, is the analog version of a conspiracy board. And I found it. A photo, blurry and yellowed, from a church retreat in 1992. Caption, Hope for the Youth, Recovery Camp Graduation. A girl, maybe 15, stands at the edge of the group, arms crossed, hair wild, face defiant. I swear it was her. Cassia, I brought the clipping to Nora. She stared at it for a long time. That's the last time I saw her, she murmured. Before the trucks came. What trucks? The ones that moved us to Sanctuary. There it was again. Sanctuary. Always sounding like a safe place, always anything but. I pinned the photo beside the map in my office. The wall was starting to look like a crime novel. String and thumbtacks not included yet. Just before sunset, I drove back to the site of room 6. The air felt different now, like the trees themselves had started whispering again. I stood in the center of the garden, what had been room 6, and looked at the walls. There was something I hadn't noticed before. A mural, faded, almost invisible, drawn in what looked like charcoal and nail scratches. A girl mid-run, arms outstretched towards something off-frame. The lines were crude but urgent, like someone had etched it in a hurry, afraid they'd forget the shape of freedom. And in tiny script barely visible above the figure's head, if I forget, I become what they want. Chills, real ones, not the fun kind. Cassia didn't just run, she resisted. And now, 39 years later, I was chasing echoes she'd left behind like breadcrumbs through a nightmare. But at least now I wasn't chasing alone. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, like avocado toast during a financial crisis. My dreams were fractured, kids' names whispered under doorways, glimpses of dark rooms that stretched wider the more I tried to light them. Every time I closed my eyes, Cassia ran. The next morning I followed her, literally. I took that 1992 retreat photo and ran facial recognition through every state-run database I could legally, and some I might have accidentally accessed. No hits, no DMV, no school records, no health insurance claims, like she'd fallen off the face of the earth, which, given the pattern so far, was almost comforting. It meant she wasn't easy to find, which probably meant she was still alive. People who vanish this hard either want to stay hidden or need to, so I drove back out. This time not to room 6, but deeper. West into the dense part of the forest where even the deer hesitate. I followed the creek bed Nora had drawn from memory, its path erratic but real. You could hear the water long before you saw it, like it was murmuring secrets into the rocks. After about 2 miles, the trees started thinning and I caught sight of something that didn't belong. A fence, old, rusted, barbed wire curled like angry punctuation across the top. It stretched in a perfect rectangle around what looked like nothing. Just weeds, thorns, and a collapsed shed swallowed by blackberry bushes. Except at the far end, a hatch, again. This one was newer, metal, padlocked, and no warning signs, because when you're hiding something, the best disguise is pretending it's unimportant. I crouched beside it, brushed away the moss and dirt, and ran my fingers over a series of faint indentations. Not numbers. Letters. RVS9, DNT, OPN RV Riverview, Section 9. My stomach twisted. Because if Room 6 was part of Riverview's so-called youth retreat, then this was one of its siblings. And if this place was worse, well, I radioed for backup but asked them to stay 30 minutes behind. If what I found was bad, I didn't want an audience. And if it was worse than bad, I didn't want anyone else walking into it. I popped the lock. It was newer than the door, probably added later. Inside, a ladder descended into blackness. The air that wafted up smelled of mold rust and something sour like spoiled milk, which, by the way, is never a good sign in horror stories or life. I climbed down. Slowly, the walls turned from metal to concrete halfway down. My flashlight flickered once, then held. At the bottom was a hallway, narrow, just wide enough to walk without brushing the walls. Footsteps echoed with a delay, like the darkness was thinking before answering. At the end, a door, painted gray, reinforced, and this time not bricked shut. It opened with a low groan. Inside, silence. But not the dead kind, the hell breath kind, like something was waiting. The room was long, maybe 40 feet, with cots lining both walls. Each cot was made. Each had a folded towel and a number. No names, just digits. On the far wall, chalkboard, and on it a list. Only 10 names, but one of them, Cassia. I exhaled sharply, almost dropped my light. Because next to her name was a single word written in block letters, retrieved. And next to all the others, inactive, I sat on the floor. Dust puffed up like it was startled to see daylight. So they took her back, at least once. But why, if she escaped, what made them bring her back? And why write it on a board that looked untouched since the 90s? Unless it wasn't untouched. Unless someone had been updating it. A scuff on the floor caught my eye. Footprints, small barefoot, leading in a circle from cot to cot, as if someone had walked here again and again, trying to remember who they used to be. I followed the prints to a narrow side door, opened it, storage room, mostly empty, except for the corner, where a blanket was folded into a makeshift bed, and next to it a stack of sketchbooks. My hands shook as I picked one up. Cassia's name was on the first page, written over and over, big, small, and cursive in block, as if she were trying to convince herself she still existed. And in the middle of the notebook, a drawing, the mural, same girl, arms stretched, running, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her, other children followed, some with blank faces, some with features drawn and then erased. And beneath them all, a single sentence, if one remembers, we all can. You ever feel like your heart just stopped, not from fear, but from the weight of something too true? Yeah, that. I took photos of everything, scooped up the books, and as I climbed out of that place, I didn't feel scared. I felt watched, not by something evil, by something waiting. Cassia had left a trail, not just to be found, but to bring the rest back with her. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace, it means anticipation, like a held breath before the scream or a finger hovering above the send button. That was the quiet riding shotgun with me as I drove back from the hatch at RV Section 9. Cassia had been there, maybe still was there, or maybe, like always, she'd moved just before I arrived, like a whisper that dodges your grasp. The sketchbooks I'd taken from the hidden room were stacked on my passenger seat. They felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. I kept glancing at them like they might start talking. Back at the office, I laid them out one by one. Each was dated in small pencil script starting in 1993, which was strange. Because Mina said Cassia disappeared in 1991. That meant she either returned or had never really left. And for the first time, I began to wonder, what if Cassia wasn't just running from them? What if she was watching us? Some pages were drawings, kids' buildings, tunnels, trees with lightning scars. Others were filled with lists, names, phrases, measurements. But one notebook stopped me cold. It wasn't dated, just labeled Room 6, Phase echo, inside one page only. Cassia did not forget. Cassia was told to run, but I never ran alone. The handwriting changed halfway through the page. Someone else finished the sentence. I checked every sample I had, Nora's notes, Jonah's scrawl, Mina's journals. Nothing matched. New writer, possibly recent. So either someone else had found this notebook and added to it, or Cassia was still alive and watching. I called the state cold case unit, gave them everything, photos, maps, journals, witness statements. They told me they'd look into it, which is law enforcement. For this sounds insane, but we can't say that out loud. By midnight, I couldn't sit still. I left the office, took the back roads through the pines, and ended up at the site of the original bus dig. I hadn't been back since the first discovery. The fog had returned thicker than ever, swirling low and fast like it had somewhere to be. The bus sat like a skeleton, roped off, half-eaten by mud. But I wasn't looking at the bus. I was looking at the trees, and that's when I saw it. Faint light, deep in the woods, flickering, moving. Not a flashlight, a candle, or more precisely, a row of candles. I followed. I know, classic horror movie. Let's follow the creepy lights into the death forest. But at that point, fear wasn't the loudest voice in my head anymore. Curiosity had taken the wheel, and paranoia was just humming along to the soundtrack. The trail curved narrow and tight until it opened into a clearing. There someone had constructed a circle of candles around an old campfire pit. Small stones had been placed in deliberate patterns, and in the center sat a shoe. A child's shoe. Pink. Velcro strap. Faded cartoon princess decal. It matched the one I saw on the bus. Next to it, a Polaroid photo. Nora, 18, modern clothes, sitting beside a lake, alive. And beside her an arm, not visible enough to identify but resting on her shoulder. Written in Sharpie on the bottom edge of the photo, "We never made it to Morning Lake, but we're trying." I knelt down, every nerve buzzing, like I'd stuck my tongue in an electrical socket. This wasn't a warning. This was an invitation. A breadcrumb. And behind me, something moved. I turned. Nothing. But a low sound threaded through the trees. Not words of whistle, not a tune, not playful, just recognition. I walked backward out of the clearing, never turning my back. Took the photo, left the shoe. Somehow it didn't feel right to move it. Back at the hospital, I showed Nora the Polaroid. Her eyes filled instantly. "That was last spring," she whispered. "I remember the lake. I remember her, Cassia." Nora nodded. "She brought me there. Said it was temporary. Said there were others and she couldn't leave them behind." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "She said not to, Nora whispered. "She said you'd find it when it was time." I sat back, mind spinning like a washing machine full of bricks. Cassia wasn't hiding. She was guiding, and I was late to the trail. I stepped out into the parking lot, stars barely visible through the haze. My phone buzzed, unknown number. One message, no text, just a photo. Grainy, zoomed in, my office wall, the pinboard. Someone had taken the photo from inside my office, and written on the wall in red pen, "Finish the story." I stood still for a full minute, cold, seeping into my spine like ink through paper. This wasn't just about the past anymore. Cassia wasn't asking me to solve something. She was daring me to remember something I hadn't even realized I'd forgotten. You ever have that moment where the world tilts just slightly, like a painting hanging crooked on a wall? That's how I felt standing there, phone in hand, staring at the grainy photo of my office wall. Someone had been inside, not just inside my building, but inside my mind. They knew how I'd laid out the case, knew what I hadn't told anyone yet, knew what I was still afraid to admit, even to myself. The message was clear. Finish the story. The thing is, I didn't realize it was my story. I spent the rest of that night not sleeping, flipping through every page of every journal, sketchbook, memo, and field report I had. Somewhere between the coffee and the sunrise, a phrase from Mina's journal stuck out again. Phase echo, failure to suppress subject L. Subject L. I always assumed it meant someone else, until it hit me like a crowbar to the frontal lobe. L, Lana, me. I'd always thought I was just a footnote in this story, the girl who got sick and missed the field trip. But what if I was never supposed to be absent? What if I was supposed to be on that bus? What if I was part of the experiment and it failed? That idea sank into me like teeth. I called Nora. When I told her what I'd found, the line went quiet for a long time. Then she said Cassia knew. She always said one was missing. One who didn't forget but never remembered. What does that mean? She meant you. I drove to the lake, the one from the Polaroid, the one where Nora and Cassia had been. It wasn't on any state park maps, just a dent in the forest, surrounded by reeds and fog. But when I stepped out of my truck, the wind carried a smell that stopped me in my tracks. Pine, damp stone, and something familiar, like childhood, like rusted monkey bars and wet pavement after summer storms. I knew this place, even if I didn't remember how. I walked the shoreline, boots crunching over old pine cones until I found another candle, still warm. Next to it, a cassette tape, labeled in tiny handwriting. They let us speak only once. Back at the station, I played it on the last functioning cassette deck in the evidence room. The tape hissed, cracked, then a voice. Nora's. Younger, soft, afraid. This is Nora, I think. I don't know anymore. It's hard to remember names when you're not allowed to say them. She paused. They said names let the world find you. But we had tricks. Whispered each other's when the guards weren't close. Mine was Nora. His was Sam. Hers was Cassia. And there was one more. She trailed off. Then, she wasn't supposed to be with us. They said she had a different designation. They called her the Echo. We called her Elle. I froze. The next words broke me. She left before it began. Got sick, they said. Or maybe she was taken back. But Cassia thought she was the key. That if Elle remembered, we could all remember. I shut the tape off. Silence. Not the comforting kind, the accusatory kind. I stared at the wall of my office, all the threads, all the pins, and realized Cassia hadn't just left clues for me. She'd built a mirror to make me look, to make me see. I was the missing link, the proof that forgetting could fail, that identity could survive. And suddenly it wasn't about finding the kids anymore. It was about what they were made into. That night I found another message. Not on my phone, not in a journal, but under my doormat, a photograph. Me, 9 years old, standing beside the bus, smiling. Chickenpox scars still fading. And behind me, Cassia, older, watching. On the back, 3 words, you were there. And for a moment, just a second, my head swam with a memory I never knew I had. Her hand pulling mine. The smell of cedar and gasoline. The sound of a door slamming shut. Then nothing. Just silence. Until now. I sat there holding that photo like it was burning a hole through my palm. You were there, Bidal. 3 words that snapped the whole damn story like a glow stick. Bright, sudden, and unmistakably real. My breath caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob because of course I hadn't remembered. Not until someone reminded me to. And now I couldn't unsee it. Cassia hadn't just been guiding me to the truth. She'd been peeling back the edges of a memory I didn't know had been laminated over. And if that photo was real, so was the implication I hadn't missed the field trip. I'd been taken off it. For years, I blamed a fever, chickenpox, a doctor's note in my mom's handwriting. But the note, I suddenly realized I'd never seen it, just heard the story. And my mom, gone now, died in 2017. No one left to ask, except Cassia. If she really saw me there, she might be the only person left alive who knew what really happened. But how do you find someone who doesn't want to be found but desperately wants you to remember? You follow the trail backwards. I grabbed the cassette tape again, rewound it, and listened carefully this time, not for the words but for the background. There it was, a train whistle, distant but distinct. Twice, then a faint horn, then bird song. I ran the audio through a filtering app on my phone and matched it with local sound maps. Only one location had both train whistles and that specific bird species, northern parulus. Tiny, annoying little things that sound like broken flutes. Riverview Depot, an old decommissioned train yard, shut down in '94. Now just a field of rusted tracks and graffiti tagged by teenagers who have no idea what might still be underneath. I drove out there before sunrise. No badge, no backup, just me, a flashlight, and the name Cassia echoing in my skull like a question I hadn't earned the right to ask. The depot was a graveyard of locomotives, graffiti-stained boxcars, trees growing through train wheels like they were reclaiming the steel. I climbed over a collapsed gate and followed the tracks west. After about 400 yards, I saw it. A hatch. Why is it always a hatch? This one was partly hidden beneath an old boxcar, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Etched into the rusted metal with what looked like a nail file. I hesitated, then opened it. The ladder led down into coal blackness, the kind of dark that felt intentional, design, like it had been placed there not by the absence of light, but by the presence of something heavier. I descended anyway. The corridor at the bottom was narrow-lined with stone, dry, clean, too clean, and on the wall, room 6.2, Cassia wing. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Cassia had her own wing. Untouched room was nothing like the others. No bunk beds, no cots, no chalkboards, just drawings, hundreds of them, lining the walls layered one over another like wallpaper made of memory. All the same girl, running, alone with others, holding hands, holding me. In the center of the room was a chair, and in that chair Cassia. Older, stronger, eyes like a wolf that learned how to wear sheep's clothing just to mess with the shepherd. She looked up slowly as if she'd expected me hours ago. "Lana," she said. She didn't say, "You made it." She said, "You're late." I stepped forward, the weight of everything I didn't remember pressing against my chest like lead. "Why me?" I asked. "You were the control," she said simply. "The one they let go." My throat tightened. "But I forgot." "No," she said. "You repressed. There's a difference. Repression is a wall. Forgetting is erasure." She stood. "I never forgot you," she added. Not once, then reaching behind the chair, she pulled out a final drawing. Me, Cassia, the bus, Morning Lake behind us, a red X over the lake. "Why did you bring me back into this?" I asked. "Because they're still out there," she whispered. "And they're watching, just like they always were." I looked at her, older now, battle-hardened, but unbroken. And I finally asked the question that had been clawing at my insides since part one. "What were we?" Cassia smiled sadly. "Not victims." Then a pause. "Not children." Another pause. "We were evidence. And they've been trying to destroy the evidence ever since. If I told you Cassia looked haunted, I'd be lying. She didn't. She looked prepared, like someone who had been living in the shadows long enough to sketch every one of them by hand. She didn't flinch when I stepped closer, didn't blink when I sat down across from her. She just waited. "Why now?" I asked. "Why pull me back into this now?" "You were always in it," she replied. And then she handed me something. A cassette, not another recording, no label, no handwriting, no cryptic phrases, just one word etched faintly in the plastic with a safety pin trial. I turned it over in my hand. Cassia sat down again, arms crossed. "That was the first one," she said. "Before the garden, before room 6, before the forgetting protocols." My skin prickled. "You mean they tested it on me?" She didn't answer, which frankly said more than words ever could. I slid the tape into my recorder and pressed play. Static, then a small voice. Mine, young, higher pitched, unmistakable. "Do I have to go in the room again, boss?" A low male voice answered, calm and clinical. "Only if you forget what we told you. But I remember. Tell me. My name is Echo, subject L. And who do you belong to?" Long silence. "Then I belong to the forgetting." I stopped the tape, hands shaking. I looked at Cassia. "I was in room 6, she nodded. "Just once. You weren't meant to stay. That's why you never fully forgot." They cut the sequence short. "And the rest of you?" "We got the full treatment," she said, "or tried to. Some of us took longer, some of us broke." "What about the others?" I asked. "Jonah, Mina, Sam. Are they?" "They remember pieces," she said. "Enough to keep going, but not enough to escape." I stood up, pacing now, heart drumming in my ears. Escape from what, Cassia? "There's no compound anymore. No cult. No guards." She gave me a look, soft, sad, and sharp enough to cut. "They don't need walls anymore," she said. "They just need doubt, silence, and people like you to not remember what really happened. That's when I noticed it. On the far wall, different from the rest, tucked in the corner, a single map, detailed, meticulous. It showed the entire Halstead County region, and marked across it in red X's were 7 locations, each labeled with a letter and number. RV S1, RV S2, RV S77 sites. Room 6 was just one of them. You've been tracking them, I asked. For years, Cassia replied. Every time one goes dark, they open another. Smaller, faster, hidden better. She stepped forward, voice lower now. I need your help to shut them down. And you think I can? I think you have to. I sat again, hands in my hair, trying to stop the spinning in my brain. Cassia, I said quietly. I'm not a hero. I'm a county sheriff with a back office full of lost files and expired evidence bags. She smiled faintly. That's exactly why they'll never see you coming. I stared at her, at the map, at the words I'd written myself just a week ago on the whiteboard in my office. What if the bus wasn't an accident? It wasn't. It was a leak, a breach in the dam, and Cassia. She'd been the flood waiting behind it. I looked back at the old cassette, Trial, and realized this wasn't about saving the others anymore. It was about finishing the story, the real one. Because if I had been Echo's subject L, then the forgetting didn't start with me. It started because of me. Cassia walked over to a drawer and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to me, inside a folder. Weathered, water damaged, but sealed with a label I'll never forget. MK Sleep Cognitive Inoculation, Halstead Trial Series, L. I stole it before we ran, she said. Didn't know what it meant, but I think you do. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were test logs, brain scans, dosage charts, behavior scoring, all mine, and one photo paperclip to the last page. Me age 9 in a white room, smiling, and behind me a mirror. Cassia stood beside it watching. Even then, always watching. There's a specific kind of nausea that comes from seeing your own childhood face staring back at you from a government experiment folder. It's like vertigo of the soul. Everything tilts, and suddenly the life you thought you lived is just one layer of someone else's design. I couldn't stop staring at that photo. Me in a white room, a smile on my face like I just won a spelling bee. But now I knew better. That wasn't a smile. That was a trained response. Cassia sat quietly as I sifted through the pages. I could feel her watching me like she was gauging how much I could handle at once. The file outlined what they called cognitive inoculation procedures. I skimmed the phrases like they were riddles from some dystopian instruction manual. Subject L demonstrates high resistance to mnemonic collapse. Initial phase 1, protocol interrupted due to immune response, physical. Memory suppression incomplete. Subject removed from group environment for reassessment. Recommend long-term passive observation. It wasn't chicken pox. I had gotten sick, but not from a virus. From them. And because of that, I was pulled out. Not to protect me, to preserve the data, to isolate the anomaly. I was never the one who got away. I was the control variable. I dropped the file, leaned back against the wall, and exhaled like I was trying to blow all this out of my lungs. Cassia finally spoke. I found that file buried in a box at Site 3, she said. Most of it was destroyed, but I kept the pages with your name. I knew you'd come. Why didn't you contact me earlier, I asked. Why the riddles, the drawings, the tapes? Because memory is fragile, she said. If I forced it, you would have rejected it. You needed to see the cracks before you could feel them. Congratulations, I muttered. I feel them. She almost smiled. You were the only one they let go, she said, because they thought you didn't know anything. They were wrong. I stood up, pacing. There are still people missing, I said. People whose names were in these journals, who were in those rooms. What happened to them? Cassia's face darkened. Some forgot everything, fully assimilated, moved to cities given new identities. They're walking around right now thinking they just had weird dreams as kids. And the rest? She hesitated. Some didn't survive the forgetting. I stopped. You mean they died? No, she said softly. They disappeared. Not physically, psychologically, empty vessels, puppets. Call them whatever you want. I call them me hollowed. The word hit me like a draft from a crypt. Have you seen any of them? She nodded. One was my roommate at Sanctuary. Her name used to be Dana. She once wrote poems on the wall about fireflies. By year 3, she stared at the wall for 16 hours a day and didn't speak. My stomach twisted. This was done to children. Yes, she said, and then to teenagers, and now I think to adults. I blinked. Wait, what? Cassia pulled out a second file, much newer, clean pages printed on modern letterhead. I flipped through it. Facility rosters, staff lists, dates from 2021. This program didn't end, she said. It just got privatized. I stared at the name on the first page, Hemera Cognitive Recovery Center, Cincinnati branch. A rehab clinic, I muttered. On paper, Cassia pointed to the footer. Owned by a shell company, she said, which is owned by another. I followed the trail, one LLC after another, until I hit the core. Revix Therapeutics, a neural wellness and memory optimization startup, funded by 3 major venture capital firms. One of them operated out of Oregon, Halstead County. Of course. My knees buckled a little. So what do we do? I asked. Blow the whistle, go public release, everything. Cassia shook her head. Not yet. Why not? Because if we scream too soon, she said they'll erase us before we finish. She stepped closer. We need to find room 7. I looked up sharply. There's a room 7? She nodded. It's not a physical place. Not anymore. It's a process. A final filter for those who didn't forget the old way, the ones like us. She pointed to the map again. To the center, marked with a red circle and a label, room 7, the mirror. They don't need walls now, she repeated. They use you against yourself. I whispered the question before I could stop myself. What if I'm already in it? Cassia looked at me. Not with pity, with certainty. You are. There's a reason horror movies don't end after the monster dies. They end when the protagonist realizes the monster lives inside them now. That's what room 7 was. Not a bunker, not a hatch, not a facility hidden in the woods. A reflection, a psychological kill switch designed to activate only when the previous systems failed. Which meant Cassia wasn't just handing me a map. She was handing me a trap. Explain, I said, my voice low and sharp. What does it mean that I'm already in room 7? Cassia didn't flinch. It means you've been monitored since you left, she replied. Not by guards, not by cameras, by behavioral proxies. I blinked. English, please. You've had thoughts that weren't yours, she said. Emotions that seemed disconnected. Moments where you forgot what you were doing mid-task. Dreams that felt like instructions. My throat tightened. Yeah, I'd had those. More often in the last year. I thought it was burnout, I whispered. Cassia tilted her head. That's what they want you to think. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folder. Again, this one thin, just one page inside. On it, my name. In a single phrase, echo subject L, phase 4, mirror conditioning active. There was a timestamp from 2 weeks ago. They reactivated your protocol, she said. I felt my pulse in my teeth. Why? Because you got too close. Too close to what? To waking up fully. I backed away, hands on my hips, pacing like the floor had answers. Cassia, this is madness. You're telling me my own mind is working against me? She stepped closer. I'm telling you your mind has 2 scripts, the one you think is you and the one they built under it. I shook my head. No, I've made my own choices. I chose to come back. I chose to investigate, did you? She asked gently. I stopped. That one hit too close. Because hadn't I felt it? That weird pressure in my chest every time I got closer to something important. The sudden urges to stop, to doubt, to walk away. Room 7 wasn't a room, it was a safety net. A final fail-safe designed to pull people like me, anomalies, back into the fold without anyone noticing. By turning us against ourselves. Cassia knelt and pulled up a hidden panel in the floor of her hideout. Inside, a metal case. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single device. Small, worn, handheld. A recorder. Analog. No digital footprint. She handed it to me. This is your anchor, she said. I recorded something for you. Something only the real you would believe. She clicked it on. My own voice played back. Hey, if you're hearing this, it means you're slipping again. Don't panic. That's part of it. Room 7 is working like it's supposed to, but you can fight it. Here's what you need to remember: you were never sick. They pulled you from the bus. They made you forget, but forgetting didn't hold. So they built Room 7 to break you quietly, slowly, painlessly. But not today. Today you're listening. Then silence. Then Cassia's voice. Lana, you told me you wanted to be the one to finish it. That if anyone was going to shut it down, it had to be you. So here's your chance. Find Room 0. That's where it started. Room 0, I looked up sharply. That's not on any of the maps. It wouldn't be, Cassia said, because it was buried before we were even born. It's the seed, the prototype, the template they cloned every other site from. Where is it? She took a deep breath, then pointed at the last place I expected, your childhood home. I laughed, one of those laughs that sounds suspiciously like crying. You're serious, Cassia nodded. They used it, before you were born, as a trial run. Your parents don't. They weren't bad people, she said softly, but they weren't uninvolved. Suddenly, the basement light that never worked made sense. The closet that stayed locked. The 2 weeks I don't remember from when I was 6. My hands were trembling. I don't know if I can do this. You already are, Cassia said. I looked at her, and for a moment I wasn't Lana Whitaker, sheriff of Halstead County. I was Elle the Echo, the one who remembered just enough to be dangerous. Cassia handed me one final envelope. Open it when you get there, she said. You'll know the door when you see it. And with that, she turned and walked into the shadows of her hideout, back into the fog of the forest, like she was never meant to be found again. And I drove. Toward the house I thought I'd left behind, to finish a story I didn't even know had started.